This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. The legend of the lost Confederate gold. We've talked about that on my show in the past, but today we have author and podcaster Shane Cashman talking about his travels into the South, where he didn't know he was going to get death threats, finding greed, bloodlust, deceit, betrayal, death, all the makings of a great mystery movie. Well, we're going to talk about his book, Tales from the Inverted World, Ghost of the Civil War. And we're going to go on this journey with him, talking about his book and his travels. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, author and podcaster, Shane Cashman. Hey, Shane, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Tony.
I'm so glad you're here, and I appreciate you. I just got back from Brazil, so I'm getting my feet wet again. Had a little vacay. And
nice.
For everybody in the chat room that's going to be popping in, please get your questions ready. We'd love to have you leave some questions for Shane and talking about his book and his journey. So, well, first of all, I mean, you've had some best-selling Amazon books, which is, first of all, congratulations. I mean,
thank you.
That is amazing. And then today we're going to be talking about the latest book, Tales from the Inverted World, Ghost of the Civil War. So first of all, we've talked about the lost Confederate gold before, not me and you, but in the past I've talked to somebody. But first of all, what was your interest in the lost Confederate gold? And then we can start with the journey of getting to where the book became reality.
Yeah, so I honestly didn't know about the lost Confederate gold. I grew up in West Point, New York, so I'm a pretty big Civil War nerd, seeing as how West Point gave the war generals on both sides.
Right.
I thought I knew a lot of the war, and I honestly didn't know about the lore of the gold. And at one point, it's probably October of 21, someone had reached out to me by email from Georgia and told me about the lost Confederate gold and how it supposedly is in a town where the Confederacy, more or less died, is where Jefferson Davis dissolved the Confederacy.
Right.
So it sounded very interesting to me. I had been writing all these articles, like a weekly article for timcast.com, which became the first book of the volume 1 for Inverted World. And I was kind of at the tail end of writing that book, looking for new ideas. And this one just kind of fell out of the sky. And I was immediately interested in the gold. Obviously, it piqued my interest because of the Civil War stuff. And there was a hint of a ghost story in the email that I received about there's an abandoned graveyard on his grandfather's property that no one can get to, but historians are looking for. And there's a handle that remains to be polished. It's brass and it looks like it's brand new. And the family story goes that the ghosts every night open the handle. Right. So I'm immediately like, yeah, I should probably go to this town. I'm looking for something new. I did a lot of New England and New York based stuff for the volume 1. So I was interested in getting out of that. And I flew down to this town, which is Washington, Georgia, that month, actually. It was probably, it was right before Halloween. So the town had been preparing for Halloween. And I went down there thinking I was only writing one article about the gold in this town. And I knew instantly within that first hour I had a book because, you're showing the fountain now. This is like the town square, the courthouse behind it. That courthouse, by the way, is burnt down multiple times. There's pretty wild pictures of all of those fires. That square in particular seems to be haunted. But anyway, within the hour of me entering Washington, I was at the Historical Museum where I was meeting 2 historians to talk about the gold, kind of get a good breakdown of their decades worth of research. I had read a few books on before my visit. And within that meeting, probably I'd say within the first 30 minutes of that meeting, I had seen a woman screaming because the ghosts were too loud in the house that we were talking outside of, which is the house right there, I believe. So I was like, okay, this town is very interesting. And I was just, within that hour gathering all these stories. So the through line very quickly in my mind was like, I'd like to learn about this gold, tell the story of the gold. How did it get into this town? But then I had all these, I call them like side quests, where I'm talking to this person who they swear up and down that they talk to ghosts. Their whole life has become them,
Right.
basically their medium. Or this person who has been possessed by the dead, or this coven of witches, and it's all in this little town. So I couldn't really like get away, and I just what I thought would be 3 days there ended up being I would go down there for 4 days or 5 days every few weeks or few months, depending throughout a year. So it was pretty exciting.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you had multiple books just from this one town. And I'm curious because I'm from the Midwest, and I know in my small town, especially back in the day, maybe not so much now, but even still, when an outsider comes into a small town, not too many people are very open to share, especially about lost gold of the Confederacy, but sharing a lot of stories of the locals. How was that for you as a New Yorker coming down to the South?
Yeah, I immediately felt like a carpetbagger. Everyone immediately recognized my accent. And if I didn't have the help of who would become my friend Clint, who's a gentleman who emailed me in the first place, he kind of became, and I say it in the book, he kind of became my Virgil, who led me through the circles of hell of this town with and Dante's Inferno, because we kept encountering very strange stories. But because of him, people were willing to talk to me. Even with him, sometimes it took me 2 or 3 months to get to people. And that would be phone calls, emails, talking to people in person who were like mutual friends, and kind of getting that trust. Because I didn't want to like exploit them, just be like, oh, this is this weird town, tell me your story. I wanted to do them justice because I love this town. I think it's a very interesting story. And I'm not the first person to go down there and write about them. There's been multiple TV shows that happen down there. I've heard stories about prior local governments kind of running out TV shows, like basically sending them on wild goose chases, saying, "Oh, the gold's that way," and who knows, it's not that way, right? So I didn't want to be like made a fool. I wanted to really talk to them and get their real stories, and let them bring me on their own without trying to force myself into this like gold narrative. Because immediately in that town, you'll see people with the metal detectors. I mean, it is a constant.
Oh, you do. So you see that people look.
Yeah. This was one of the first elderly men I met down there was with the metal detector, and Clint and I had asked him, and he was really like tight-lipped. He did not want to tell us about anything. And I was just like, sir, I really just want to know what you think about it. I'm not going to follow you home. Although it did cross my mind because some of these guys, they know more, Right. But it was very interesting to try to ingratiate myself into the town and not, I didn't want to throw anybody off. And so by the end, I'm rolling around town with the mayor. I'm with, I know that I'm at the police, one of the police chief's retirement parties. I'm trying to tell a vivid story for this town because it's kind of propped up by the gold economy. They kind of for a while counted on this gold, whether it was not the residents finding it themselves, who some claim they have, or if it was the outsider finding the gold, which that would be the worst thing for them.
Yeah, I believe the last time I spoke with somebody about the gold, they did say that it wasn't all in one spot because, I think that would not be smart anyway to put. It's kind of like putting all your money in one bank. Yep. So putting all your gold in one spot. So what was some of the legends of the gold of once you broke those barriers of was it hidden? Do people talk about, is it hidden in different spots? Those people that said that they did find some of the gold, how legit do you feel that is? Or is it, again, one of these fish tales that just kind of, you know, a 2-pound bass ended up being a 15-pound bass by the.
It's all the above. So I talked to people who had claimed to find gold beneath pine fence posts because the pine doesn't rot. So they believe way back when they used the pine as a great place to hide the gold, because again, it's hard to use the gold, especially after the war. You know, then immediately you got a target on your back.
Exactly.
Other people and this lady, I trust her quite a bit. She's a pretty legit woman. She claimed to have found some gold in an old chimney. You know, if you like see one of those old chimneys where there's only a foundation left and it's deep in the woods. So there's stories like that. Now, in terms of documented history, and even with this, I'm skeptical, because a lot of the stuff coming out of either the federal government or the dying Confederacy is still suspect to me, because I think everyone wanted the gold, even people, you know, who were low level, right?
Right, of course.
But in terms of documents, you will see that there were 2 issues in, I believe it was May 1865. And this is, you know, Davis is on the run. The Confederacy has, I think, been officially dissolved. If not, it's about to be. And we're in Washington, in this town in Georgia. And there was a mutiny and a robbery, two separate events. And the mutiny was the Confederates, who had basically been so desperate now. They're not being paid rations. A lot of them were fighting to hopefully bring home some money or get some land, right? And now they're getting nothing. They're seeing their president, or former president, on the run. So they revolted. And some of them got away with gold, some of them didn't. And then there was a robbery. And this is one of those things where it depends who you talk to. The robbery could have been the locals. It could have been the locals dressed as Confederates. It could have been the Union dressed as Confederates, you know, and everyone's got a different story. And that's all from articles back then leading up to now. And the historians will still fight about that. But some of the funny stories about the robbery are they went there with horses, and they filled their bags with so much gold that it was so heavy the horses were falling over. And the horses were then tramping the gold into the ground. So people still go to this area. And I've talked to people who found pieces of gold there, and they look for the gold. And there's a part of a road called Grab-All Road, which they would later name Grab-All, because when it rains, they believe the gold will come out of the ground. You can grab all you can. I didn't see any gold there, unfortunately. But so there's that, you know. And then the other thing on top of all of that is when the gold left Richmond, which is where it was when Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy. And then the Confederates burnt down Richmond, and then they fled. And 2 trains left that city, one with the gold and the treasury and like the silver dollars, I believe, that Mexico donated. The other train left with Jefferson Davis and his cabinet. They didn't count that gold when they left Richmond. And then it's put in, the people in charge of that gold is William Harwar Parker, this crazy captain who had just burnt his ship down, and a bunch of teenagers, real young men. So, and they're just carrying gold. So I feel like a lot of things could have happened to the gold between Richmond and then getting to Washington. And then there's a robbery, a mutiny, and then, you know, who knows what. You know, I've heard every story. And the one really interesting thing about that town that, you know, I'm not used to in New York is that most of the people are directly tied to, you know, the Civil War. Their great grandfather fought in it, and in the Revolution, right? And they were there before it was even America. So and this is the big conflict in the town, where it's the historians who, you know, the locals will be like, oh, those historians, those city slickers from Atlanta, they come in here and they change the story. So the locals are always at odds with the historians, because the locals are telling the stories as it was told to them throughout the generations. And then the historians are coming in looking at purely like documents. Right. And again, my skepticism is for both. You know, I'm looking at both, and sometimes both stories will negate one. Sometimes they line up. So that's a lot of stuff I was going through while researching, is trying to talk to everybody in terms of the gold and the history. But I give, you know, the grace and patience to both the historians and the locals, because I think both are fascinating stories, whether or not you want to believe them.
And I think from my memory, a lot of the gold that is supposed to be used for when the South will rise again type of thing. I've heard that before. Did you hear that in your conversations about how? That's why I'm curious to see why that gold is now still hidden in potentially Cedar fence lines or whatever, to saying that if this is money that they're going to use to rise up again against the North or whatever it is.
Right.
What's your take on that?
There was definitely some talk of it. What are they called? The Knights of the Golden Circle. The Knights of the Golden Circle, right? And they were supposed to help the Confederacy rise again. Davis was going to go to, I want to say, to Cuba and then to Mexico. Davis himself tried convincing William Howard Parker to come with him because he was so proud of how he brought the gold all the way down. I had to read this 600-page diary.
Oh my gosh.
Parker. But it's fascinating because he also has ghost encounters. So I talk about it a lot in the book, but it's worth reading his diary if you have the time. But yeah, there was a lot of talk from back then up until now of this, Knights of the Golden Circle. I don't give much weight to that. I don't think there's anything with that. I think the gold is either gone and or has been used in other ways, and there's a ton of theories about that. There's one family down there who I'm blanking on their name right now. It's in the book, but a lot of people believe that their ancestors got a lot of the gold and held on to it. And that's what it's kind of like a standoff with everyone with the gun at each other, because they're like, no, you got the gold. No, you got the gold. And everyone's saying you got the gold. So I think there is no more big cachet. People think they're going to come across some giant treasure. Right. I think it's been so fractured and used. And I believe the federal government did get it at some point. What was left over, though,
right?
Right. And you can't really reference what they got versus what left Richmond because they never counted it to begin with. They counted it in South Carolina, I want to say, one of the Carolinas, but a lot happened, right? They're traveling on foot and they're being chased by the Union. So that's a lot of ground to cover with a lot of really heavy gold.
Right, right.
So it's really hard to determine what, and basically distinguish fact from fiction. So yeah, people love to talk about the Knights of the Golden Circle as if there's this cachet that's hiding somewhere. I just don't buy it.
So the Knights of the Golden Circle, we've talked about them. We've talked about the Masons. We've talked about many different secret societies. Did you see any type of secret societies down in that town or in that area that still exist? Because I know, like I said, even in Brazil, I saw so many, especially in South Brazil, and even Mason lodges. And I was like, I was real shocked that I saw so many Mason lodges down in Brazil. So I was curious to see if there's any type of secret societies that you reckon or were recognized or saw in that area.
Oh yeah. So the Masons are really big. And there's one cemetery that is it's been there since, I want to say, Battle of Kettle Creek, which is one of the bloodiest battles of the Revolution, which is also in this town. So a lot of people I'm talking to, the relatives are in the cemetery, and in Clint, his entire family's there.
Oh, really?
This is
Wow.
Where he will end up one day. So the first time he took me there, I was kind of shocked at the amount of Masonic symbols in the cemetery. And it was also, what is it? Sisters of the Eastern Star.
Yeah.
I believe that's a sister version of the Masons. It kind of looks like the pentagram.
Yes.
I think that's their symbol. So there was a ton of that. And yeah, that definitely, it didn't come up against that in the modern day as if they were giving me problems. I got problems from a lot of other people in that town that may or may not be connected to the Masonic Lodge. I don't know, but it is definitely a thing. And it seems like a lot of even the younger crowd is joining the secret society. And my theory is that because this town has just seen so much devastation that it offers this community to people where they feel nothing but despair. So I don't know if that's a good or bad thing,
right?
But because all the things associated with that. But the town itself has just seen so much doom that I think they just kind of fall in a pattern of these secret societies because that's like their only anchor to getting through life. When you look through these cemeteries and they're just covered, it was kind of alarming to me. When you're seeing entire families throughout the ages with all those symbols,
right?
And it was quite wild. So yeah, but I don't know if there had any connection to the gold, but there was a funeral of a man who was the main guy in town, who was one of the people who was very stubborn and would not talk to me. He wouldn't even allow Yankee at his funeral. I mean,
oh really?
this guy he did not like anyone from the North. He still held a grudge. But the funny thing is, he had agreed to meet with me right before he passed away. So I was going to go down, and the reason he's so important is because he had so much land that supposedly gold was left on, and it was his wife actually who had found a bunch of gold, according to her, in a chimney. So but I'm thinking of him because he had the whole Masonic funeral, the whole, I interviewed everybody that I could from that funeral, because I was right in the process of writing the book, and that was fairly early on, right before Christmas. So yeah, I was only into the research for like a few months at that point. And I would have liked to talk to him. As abrasive as he might have been, he had some interesting stories, and he seemed, eventually, it took a lot, that he was going to talk to me. I was willing, to believe that he might just be leading me down a wild goose chase, but he was an interesting enough character. But yeah, he was one of the biggest Masons in the area for sure.
And in your book, you talk about receiving death threats, deceit and betrayal, all the death, all this stuff. Did you feel was more threatened by your presence? Was it people, like you said, in like a masonry, or just certain locals that, like you said, did not want to have anything to do with a union or a northern man? Or why do you think that, or is it just because you were looking for the gold period?
I think it was just looking for the gold period. So there's two different instances with the death threats. The first one was directly at Clint, but because of our investigation, the guy who showed up to his house, this guy in a truck, told us we better stop looking or else, and I can't confirm it, but I believe that I ended up meeting him. Even I asked him to his face if he was the guy who came to the house with the threat, and he just kind of ignored it. This is when I'm driving in his truck at the end of the book, and he's got the gun on his leg, in his leg, and fascinating character. But he's one of those guys whose family's been there forever, and I think he, like others in that town, they see the gold as like their baby, whether they find it or not. It's like their local thing that is, to them, the gold is a part of their family, and they want to make sure like either no one gets it, or if we tell the story, we tell it right. Because they're so mad at the historians who they don't believe tell it right. And the historians are the ones who usually get the articles published and stuff like that. So that's one thing, whether it's they don't want me to find the gold or tell it wrong, or even just be in town because I'm a northerner. It's like a mixture of all those things. Now, the other one, which got a little more serious, was a guy who threatened to skin me alive like a dog. And that's because I was seeking to interview his girlfriend. And and oddly enough, the girlfriend is the lady I told you about earlier, who was the one who's screaming because the ghosts were too loud. She believes she had been possessed by the dead on multiple occasions. And she was also down there filming a TV show. So she saw me as a bit of like a competition. Although I assured her, like, I'm not your competition. We're doing two different things. You're doing your own thing.
Right.
But I'd like to talk to you. I'll interview you. I'll obviously promote your story, your show. And then she disappeared. And that was it. I didn't really think much of it, and I wound up meeting a bunch of witches. I was gonna say ghosts. I kind of met ghosts too. I met a bunch of witches, and the town seems to have a high witch population. And there's a whole chapter about the witches. But anyway, they wanted to bring Clint, when I wasn't there, to some what seemed to me like blood magic ritual under a full moon on the battlefield at Kettle Creek.
Oh wow!
They were gonna charge their crystals. So I was like, you know what? That girl I met with the possession stuff, she's into that world too. She considers herself a witch as well. We'll reach out to her and get her point of view on what this is. And I think, the boyfriend, there was this whole thing. It's in the book too about there's a very abusive relationship happening that we didn't really know about till afterwards. And I had to talk to the police about this. The boyfriend must have seen either my email or text message to her, sent us these really crazy voice messages, which in itself is crazy to leave a voice message like that. He had a wonderful accent from the bayou. So yeah, he was not happy. So that was a whole other thing, that was just because I wanted to clarify some witch stuff with his girlfriend, she was very nice. And it seemed like she was just in a really terrible situation.
Right.
And yeah, so she believed she was possessed by the second woman ever hanged in Georgia, Polly Barclay, who oddly enough had her abusive husband murdered. So yeah, it was a whole
Very
wild
coincidental.
story. Very coincidental. So yeah, it's either helping her case or she truly is possessed. I couldn't tell you.
How about, because in the South, I mean, in the hills, they talk a lot about witches, and up in Boston, we hear about the witch trials and stuff like that. But how is witches perceived in the South? I wouldn't think with, the big Christianity, how that is not frowned upon.
Oh, it is. It is.
Oh, okay.
Like there's grandmas who are not happy that their granddaughters are witches. However, the witches I met have created this weird loophole where they're Christian witches or Catholic witches.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I went to this hotel, which is in that square you showed earlier with the courthouse and the fountain. It's called the Fitzpatrick, and I stayed a few nights there. And the reason was, I heard there was a trap door in the floor there that would lead me to an old graveyard, which is where Polly Barclay was supposedly buried after they hanged her for murdering her husband. So I was looking for that trap door. I came down my first morning there, looking for anyone at the front desk, if I could ask them, like, what a bizarre question, like, hey, where's that trap door? So there was someone there, a young lady, she looked like she was doing her homework or something. And I said, I heard there's a trap door. She goes, you're basically standing on it. She lifted up this giant door out of the ground. And I honestly forget how we got onto the topic, but within a minute or two, she tells me she's a witch. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And this is like the second or third witch I've met now. I'm like, that's a lot of witches.
You're like,
in this
what's
little
going
town.
on?
I'm like, do you know so-and-so? She doesn't know so-and-so. The other witch didn't know this one. I'm like, okay, so you're all just witches on your own volition. That's cool. And it turns out her homework that she's doing is for mortuary school. And she's now giving some shark tooth sacrifice to Anubis. So I'm like halfway down the stairs to go to this graveyard while we're having this conversation. So I'm like, well, I got to talk to the witch now. So her and others, and it just it turns out there was 4 other witches in this hotel at that moment. So by the end of this conversation, I'm with 3 or 4 other witches, and we're all talking about their experiences being a witch in this town, ghosts, possession, and how their grandparents feel about it. So to answer your question, their grandparents are not happy, but they kind of live with it in a nonchalant way. It's kind of interesting because they coexist in a sort of beautiful way. And this is one example. The one witch was like, I was possessed by a demon, she said, because she accidentally conjured one out of hell when she was a child. So she was performing witchcraft, at a very young age.
Right.
But she called it an accidental conjuring. So her grandma heard this and said she'll just pray over her, and did some kind of like Christian ritual, not an exorcism. There's another word she used. I forget the word. So it's like she was there to help. It was this very grandmotherly thing of like getting the demon out of her witch granddaughter. But yeah, some of them actually do consider themselves Christians or Catholics, and they have kind of become a part of the community where they're not, I would think beforehand they would be shunned, or you have to be like a witch in secret, but most of them are kind of in the open about it. Even like with people who are
crazy Aunt Bertha.
yeah. But they'll go to her for help, and like there's respect between, there's a respect because they're doing a lot of like that medicinal stuff that I think a lot of their ancestors from way back when brought over from Europe. So a lot of like herbs and Appalachian type witch stuff.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that's pretty cool. I find all that fascinating, and I work, I've interviewed many witches and mostly a lot of them are here from California or ones from New Orleans because, there's a lot there, but to hear in small town Georgia, that's pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah.
So I saw one thing that you did do. You got to walk some of these battlegrounds, battlefields where soldiers were killed. And I'm curious because you talk also about ghosts. You talk about the lady that saying she was possessed. Did you ever experience any of your own ghost stories there? Because the South has a lot of history of, with death and battles and just people dying young. And So what was your experience with that?
Yeah. So I didn't have like an explicit ghost situation.
Mm-hmm.
I've had others before,
But not
I
here.
think, but not really in Georgia, not ghosts. We can get into the other situation after this, but there, it was hard because, you know, when you're walking those fields, you don't know if you're bringing that feeling of the ghost to it because of what you know happened there.
Right.
Or if it's the land doing it to you or the ghost or whatever. Because there's certainly a very distinct, very close relationship between the living and the dead in the South, especially in Georgia. And it's like the dead are a part of their life every day, very nonchalant. I'll be with people. I might not see the ghost, but people just randomly in conversation will address a ghost. You know, so-and-so's here. Oh, hi, so-and-so. You know, oh, there's a lady with the parasol. You know, this, and they're just,
wow.
It's like they're half joking or they're not joking. It's,
You're like,
I don't think they even know. You know, some of them, like the mediums, they truly believe it.
Right.
But even normal people, because a lot of the very religious people down there who are reluctant to talk about the paranormal, once I start talking about it and we spend a lot of time together, and I've spent dozens of hours with some of these people talking about it, and they get comfortable, and then all of a sudden they'll tell you the story about the chair that moved in the night, you know, and these are like, you know, Southern Baptist hardcore. And, you know, I'm like the 12th hour after 3 months of talking, I'm like, you know, there was that chair, or there was that door, or there was that sound,
right.
or there was that noise I heard when I was hunting before the sunrise, you know. So there's something there. I think I was mostly sensing that relationship that I was saying about between the living and the dead, which I really love. You know, I grew up in an old area where the graveyard was basically it was a part of the town. Not like we put the dead away. They were
right.
We kind of honored them, and that's how I was brought up. So I love that feeling. And I was with people who had those experiences, whether it was the girl screaming, the medium who had this problem with this haunted doll that we went and saw. But for me, I guess the only thing I really did experience that I can't explain was the UFO I just kept seeing. And I talked to so many people about it. That was my third night there. I was at Clint's parents' house, and we're in the backyard. It was super dark. It's one of the darkest places in the country. And it's so dark that there's a Deer Lick Astronomy Village had put their village just outside of town. And so like this village of astronomers, so they could observe the sky. It's, when I say dark, I mean, I grew up in the country in New York, and I thought I understood what a clear night sky was, but there's nothing like what I saw in this town. When you look up, it's just a canopy of stars.
Wow.
So yeah, I guess that was my third night there. We're looking at the backyard out past the tree line. So the town is also surrounded by pines that are grown and cut down every 7 years. So it's just hundreds of miles of pine trees. And I'm looking up, and above the pine trees is this bright gold circle going up and down and left and right constantly. At first, I'm just like, okay, that's weird. But then Clint and his father are like, there it is. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, we've been seeing that our whole life. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, we don't know. They call it a UFO. I mean, technically it's a UFO. It's an unidentified flying object. It's not moving. It's not deviating from this weird path it keeps doing. I'm watching planes go by all normal. And this thing just keeps going up, down, left, and right. We take a golf cart, or a gator, it was, out into the woods closer to it, but still it's so high up, it's like you don't get much closer. But we went into another clearing and just watched it do its thing for a while, and then another one appeared to the left doing the same thing. And so that was intriguing. I couldn't really explain what that was, and it got weirder because I kept seeing them, and I would ask meteorologists, I would ask the DEA if it was helicopters, so meteorologists if it was a weather balloon, DEA, local cops if it was a drug helicopter, army officials, army bases, see if there's any kind of army thing. None of them knew what it was. But the DEA police I talked to and the meteorologist were like, oh, we've been seeing that our whole life too, we have no idea what that is. And the meteorologist really hates paranormal, anything supernatural, hates the idea of UFOs. Very by the book guy, super smart. He was like, yeah, that I just don't understand. I've been seeing it forever too. So that led me down that path of like, well, what the heck is it? And I don't know what it is still, but I was able to talk to people who they claim it would land in not that, but UFOs would land in their backyard in this town. And at one point, someone told me that they had a Polaroid of it, or their deceased friend had a Polaroid of it. And someone tried getting to the house that this man lived in, looked for the Polaroid. We couldn't find it. They couldn't find it. But I talked to multiple people who had seen that Polaroid. And then I talked to people who are older than that, who grew up in the same house, and this is probably the 40s or 50s at this point, who also said they would see these things laying in the yard.
Wow.
And so I don't get it. I don't know. I still don't know what it is, but it's just so fascinating that this UFO thing just was such a nonchalant thing, just like the ghosts, right?
Right.
And it's become such a part of their everyday life that it took like this outsider to be like, what? Are you kidding?
What is
like,
that?
what?
Yeah,
Like, oh yeah, you know what? That is weird. We forgot all about the Polaroid and all that stuff.
Right.
So yeah, that was to me, I think, the craziest weird experience I had while down there. I still don't know what that was. I've talked to other people elsewhere who've seen similar things. I thought I've seen UFOs before, but they've been kind of debunked. So for this one, it's still open-ended for me.
Well, I mean, Jimmy Carter, when he said,
Yep.
he's from Georgia, and he said when he was
Right.
younger that him and the whole people on their block saw a UFO fly over their town. So, and then also, the history of human race, the Anunnaki came in here to have humans mine for gold. And so who knows, maybe the gold of the lost Confederacy is attracting this UFO
I think there's something to it. I mean, the Carter situation is very interesting because it's so similar to what I saw. If you go back and read what he wrote, so he was on the he wasn't on the campaign trail yet for the presidency.
I don't think so yet. No.
Either the governor or about to be the governor. And he was outside of a Lions club in Georgia, and him and about 10 other guys saw a bright orb over the pine trees.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Never really thought about it until he was then on the campaign trail, told that story. That got to some UFO, guy. I forget the guy's name. And then that guy wrote, it was like the official UFO Society guy. He wrote to Carter saying, hey, we'd love you to fill out this form. And you can find it online. It's a great handwritten form of Carter filling out exactly what he saw to the best of his ability. And then he called, he was pretty adamant about calling for UFO transparency on his campaign trail for president. So in the book, I share the letter I wrote to Carter. He never replied, but I was calling for some transparency here because, there's so many odd things happening in the past 5 to 10 years in terms of the UFO UAP rebranding, the hearing we heard last year in Congress where they're talking about the UAPs and what they found at different military bases. That article in the New York Times where they talk about vehicles not of this earth that they found in outer space. Like, what does that even mean? That sentence kind of haunts me. So yeah, I reached out to Carter after discovering his event in Georgia and said, hey, I saw something weird in Georgia too. We should call for transparency. So that led me down a really cool rabbit hole of him. He never really gave up. The rumor goes he asked Bush Sr. to release documents when Bush was in charge of the CIA, and that he said no to Carter, and that Carter never talked about UFOs or aliens again, which is fairly true. However, people don't say Carter wrote a letter to extraterrestrials and put it in the Voyager when they sent it into space. And it's a really beautiful letter that people should look up. So it's like he never really let go of that idea. So they sent that into space, and then he would write a book of poems later on in life. And
wow.
he also addressed the void of space and the mystery, which it's also a beautiful piece of writing. So, but yeah, that was a fun rabbit hole to go down.
I mean, that's amazing. And it is funny how a lot of people that before they get in office, they're all like, hey, that's transparency. Then they get in office and then they kind of just, yeah.
Yep.
So it either tells you two things. They get in office and they're like, there's really nothing there. Or it's like, oh my God, we can't tell people right now.
Yeah. My gut says it's the latter.
Yeah,
honestly.
me too. I do. Yeah.
I think if it was nothing, we'd probably heard it's nothing. But even if they tell us it's nothing, I have a hard time believing that.
Right,
right. But there's just too many weird things, whether it's the official records that come out, these new UAP things.
Right.
I'm fascinated by all that. But, the hearing that happened last, I think it was exactly a year ago now. One of the most memorable parts of that for me was, so there's the open hearing and the closed hearing. In the open hearing, one of the people brought up, which is funny in retrospect, they said UAPs that were underwater, which kind of negates the whole thing. But the guy who was being questioned said, we'll have to talk about that in a closed hearing. I'm like, oh, we're not talking about underwater enough when it comes to, what's going on underwater
Right.
that they're not telling us. But yeah, it's so interesting to me. I think, they tell us it's for national security. So I honestly believe that there's a lot they're not telling us that's not of this earth, but there's also a lot that they can't tell us because it's them doing things that are so beyond what we can even imagine now. I always think about how they built this crazy atom bomb, and it changed the way we see weaponry all of a sudden now, and now we think of the atom bomb as like the end all be all, but who knows what they've built since, right? And or in terms of spacecraft, in terms of weapons. So, and it's not like they stopped.
Right. No, they have not.
They've definitely made some wild stuff. We have iPhones now,
Yeah.
I can't even fathom what they've been making. So it's a mixture of those things. And I think the authorities have to dance around all of that. But the lack of transparency doesn't help our imagination, which will run wild, which I enjoy. But I would like to have some more answers from these people one day, I hope.
For sure. And this goes back to even the treasure. It's like, there's so many mysteries and so many unsolved, not crimes, but unsolved historical situations that we just want to know, what really happened, like JFK and all these things that we want to find the answers, but and we know that for some reason we're not supposed to, or they don't think we're supposed to know. So this became like the whole theme of the book. Yes, the gold. Yes, these weird ghost stories, UFOs, but it's this constant conflict of what truth and history really is. I'm down there, I'm seeing two historians almost get into a fist fight over whether or not people during the revolution at the Battle of Kettle Creek were on horseback or not, as they're building their little 3D model. Oh, and like they can't even come to terms with whether it was horseback. It wasn't even the whole thing. It was just one part of that part fighting, whether they were on horseback or not. And then you come across all these other things in research about just like, Sherman, General Sherman in the March of the Sea, and just how depraved that got. And, I consider that like our first atom bomb, the way he kind of burnt the South down. We can debate that whole thing forever. But when you read firsthand accounts of what happened there, where, Sherman pretty much okayed the slaughter of freed slaves, which it's like the most heartbreaking thing I came across in my research. Like, how could that happen? They're more worried about doing the job of burning everything down than the people that they were helping free. And it starts to create this really amorphous look at history. Right.
Like, good and evil, what is it? What is good, what is true, what is false? Who's writing this history? And it always kept coming back to the gold. What happened to the gold? Who do you believe in? And then, like I said earlier, the locals and historians. So it's just, how do you believe anything anymore? These people want to believe their family who's told them the stories. These people want to believe the documentation.
Yeah.
We know the game of telephone, how that works. We know governments, especially dying ones like the Confederacy, will lie to get ahead. So you have to just, go with what you think is the best, and also understand you'll probably never know the full truth, but we'll continue to try our best.
That's all we can do. And I think people like you and me that, have fallen in love with these family and just country tales and family tales and stories that we grew up with. I even from my hometown, there's stories of stuff from the where Native Americans lived there, stuff from when the Civil War was there, and just family secrets that there's always something, but I think eventually things are coming to the head of it, to where we can finally understand what really happened. But unfortunately, sometimes I don't know if we're ever going to find out the truth. In fact, the lost Confederate gold, who knows if we'll ever really know the truth. And because I think, like the Smithsonian and many other agencies, what the giants in the Bible, and people, they find these giants around the world that they talk about it and then they disappear, and all of a sudden there's no evidence of it, and you're just like, what just happened? With
I think a lot of the modern world has created a bit of a cage around our perception
Right.
of the world. You know, obviously the world changes, and obviously progress will change the way we view the world and ourselves. But yeah, with the Smithsonian, or whether it's the Civil War, there's these like gutters they put up to kind of make you think it's just very simple, you know, without any nuance, all
Yeah.
of these things. And I think there's a lot more magic in this world. And for whatever reason, modernity has no room for that magic,
Right.
which is why I think we're interested in this kind of stuff. And you just reminded me actually of, speaking of the gold again, do you know about Dents Run, Pennsylvania, what happened there? I believe it was
Tell me.
Dents Run. I believe their company's called Finders Keepers is their name. They're a treasure hunter group, and they came across a site that they believe Confederate gold was in, and they found it. They didn't get to dig yet, I believe is the story, and then the feds came in. They swooped in, carted it off, and took it. And so when the Finders Keepers guys went back, there was just a hole in the ground.
And it was
That's
gone.
how it is. Whatever happened, they didn't get it, and the feds got it. And I think it's still in court right now because they're like, "What happened? This is like we found this." So like story was breaking when I was going down to Georgia for the
Wow.
first time for the book, and then that's why I think people to this day, especially in Georgia, still distrust the feds. They'll still call, like, they don't call the union, they call them the feds. They still call the North the feds, right?
Right.
And that goes for various reasons, but like when it comes to the gold, they don't trust. I don't think they want to talk about it for that reason as well, because they're like, if we tell you we found it, they're gonna come swooping in.
Yeah.
Which sounds kind of paranoid, but I just, on my first trip down, read about Dents Run, Pennsylvania, where that did happen. So it's like their paranoia is justified.
Well, I mean, in the early 1900s, I'm sure you've heard of this, where they, discovered that cave in the Grand Canyon that supposedly had a bunch of Egyptian treasures and all kinds of different stuff.
I don't know about that. No?
Yeah, check it out. It was actually Scott Walter, on American Unearthed. They did a segment on it, and apparently it was in the paper. It was in the local paper in Arizona, and next thing you know, the Smithsonian came in and just pretty much wiped it clean, and now that area is government surveillanced, and you can't even get close to that area. So yeah, they said that they found a cave that was full of like Egyptian and artifacts, and treasures.
I would like to think so I'm like psychotically optimistic about everything, even as bad as things get in the world. And I think these ideas of whether it's this thing in the Grand Canyon, the gold, the history, what the Smithsonian has done, I'd like to think at some point a lot of this will be released, and I hope. And
I
it's
hope
going
so.
to expand like the human consciousness, like the way we see ourselves. To me, right now, it seems rather narrow. And when I talk about those gutters that these institutions put up around history, it keeps us in this very narrow way of perceiving the world. I would love to see that happen. I think the powers that be, whatever it is, they're afraid of us seeing ourselves in that way, in this grander way, which I see ourselves like that. I believe in this stuff, but to see it become widespread could be beautiful. But I think a lot of the fear of the people who, if you want to believe that they're keeping a lot of the stuff secret, they're afraid of us, kind of having this better, greater understanding of the history and ourselves.
So writing this book, what was your takeaway? Because you, like you said, you went on a search for gold, and you got a lot more. What was your takeaway from this book at the end?
Yeah. So in terms of history, I started calling it historical cubism. It made me think of a Picasso painting, right? Where everything's so cubist and angular, and if you stand here, this part of history looks different. Then you move over here, this part of history looks different, and you kind of have to stand in all those positions to get a fuller understanding of history. So that was one thing I really started to think about, and it made me rethink how I saw other, history and who writes it, and how we, just think about the textbooks I read growing up and how narrow that view of history was compared to the fullness of what I was getting between the historians and the locals and the research from the diaries in town. So there's that. And then in terms of the gold, I say this in the book, and my theory, I still believe it. I believe a lot of people who were locals got their hands on that gold.
Hmm.
And I believe, they were very devoutly Christian and probably felt guilty. And this is all just me speculating, but it's not just me. It's a lot of people believe this down there as well. So I believe people wanted that gold. And
I'm sure.
it's hard to think that how this town ended up building, I want to say 30 churches, might be more, at a time where maybe 30 years had passed since the war, and the town had not been doing well economically. Obviously, the industry had been dying. A lot of men had been gone now or never came back because of the war. Sherman never burnt down this area, but there were some marauders who came close and destroyed a lot of bigger places.
Right.
So I think of these people being desperate and stealing, getting their hands on some gold, and then holding on to it because there's nothing you can do, honestly, right? Like I said earlier, if you start using the gold, everyone's going to know you got the gold. So my theory is that some people held on to it for a while and then, feeling guilty, invested it in other things.
Wow.
Perhaps building churches, right? Because the first thing you'll notice in this town, other than the people scouring the land with their metal detectors, is the amount of churches. And it's a very small town. There's not a lot of people. And some of these places have beautiful stained glass. Some of them have Tiffany stained glass. So I looked into, the history of the Tiffany's, when it was bought, who built this building, who built that building, how did they do it? How did they survive the economic despair in a town that was, it's really cut off from everything, even to this day. It's known for the pine, the trees now, where it was once known for the cotton. So that was one thing, is I believe those people got the gold and they might have invested it way later on into other things to make them feel better about the guilt of having stolen it.
Wow.
So those, I think, my two biggest takeaways, that and just going down there and how important it is to just hear everybody out,
Yeah.
no matter who they are. I was talking to people who I probably never would imagine myself talking to, and they probably felt the same way about me, right? But I do like to extend the grace and patience to people and let them tell their full story, because that to me is as important as the documents I'm finding in the library or wherever I'm looking. So I just, you got to talk to everybody, hear them out, and then weigh their story against the official story.
Right.
And then kind of reconstruct what you think is the best thing.
Well, I love it. And for the people out there, in case you need to know the name of the book again, it's Tales from the Inverted World, Ghost of the Civil War. And I have to say, I loved going on this journey with you. I wish I could have been there in person. I think that would have been fascinating. Because I do. What'd you say?
Next time you have to bring a metal detector.
Oh, don't worry. Don't worry. I would love to. But I'm a person that loves to sit and just listen to people's stories. I used to listen to my grandma, my grandpa, my dad, and my uncles. All of them just tell these stories from back in the day and from their own ancestors. So I think it's fascinating to hear all the good tales. So,
Yep,
but thank you so much. Well, how do people follow you, find you, listen to your podcast, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so you can find me. I'm at Shane Cashman everywhere. You can find Tales from the Inverted World. The first volume is actually on YouTube right now. So that's from the first book. It's animated, it's narrated. And then the first two episodes, which become the first two chapters of this book we just talked about, are also on YouTube. The rest, if you want to see the narrated and animated versions, at timcast.com. And the book is at ghostofthecivilwar.com.
Perfect. And Shane Cashman, also your website too.
Yeah, shanecashman.com.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shane. Please come back. I enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully I'll get to go on one of those adventures with you. You should have like a tour or something. People always take people to Egypt. Why not take somebody to look for gold or something?
That's a pretty good idea, and I might look into that. That's awesome.
There you go.
Thank you for having me on. This is a blast.
Anytime. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Please tune in every Friday for another episode of Truth Be Told. Make sure on Mondays you listen to Robert Hensley. He does MINUTEMAN Reports for Truth Be Told. We have Metaphor does the Spanish version, Espanol for Truth Be Told on Tuesdays at 3. And then Bonnie Burkert, she does more of the spiritual side of Truth Be Told at 3 o'clock. So please listen to all other Truth Be Told versions. And we really appreciate you supporting us and sharing, liking, and being a part of our family that's been here. I can't believe we've been doing this for 13 years or something like that. So, but until next time, thank you, and I will see you soon. This is Tony Sweet. I'm out. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.